I want to thank you for stopping by today to listen to today's message. And I want to begin with, some experiences that maybe we have seen or we have experienced in others where maybe there was a major life change. They just went a different direction in their lives. And when you or someone you knew, they made that major change, that they began to feel like outsiders with those that used to be their friends, their close relationships. Maybe you used to be a person that loved to just party all the time, and you change to focus on things that are more important. Or maybe you used to be one that focused on career and the friendships that are built through careers, and then you made a change to where you wanted to focus on your family. And people just didn't understand why you weren't doing the things that you used to do. Or those that were once your best friend then become basically your acquaintance because you made such a drastic change that that connection's not there anymore. Well, that type of change in lifestyle and the repercussions of that, the early church, the early Christians understood it very well. They learned the importance of, and what we're going to be talking about today, of living for what lasts. What is important? Why are we living the lives that we live? What's the point of the lives that we live? And we are in 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 1 to 11. And Peter writes, "Therefore, since Christ suffered in his body, arm yourselves also with the same attitude, because whoever suffers in the body is done with sin. As a result, they do not live the rest of their earthly lives for evil human desires, but rather for the will of God. For you have spent enough time in the past doing what pagans choose to do, living in debauchery, lust, drunkenness, orgies, carousing, and detestable idolatry. They are surprised that you do not join them in their reckless, wild living, and they heap abuse on you. But they will have to give account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. For this is the reason the gospel was preached, even to those who are now dead, so that they might be judged according to human standards in regard to the body, but live according to God in regard to the spirit. The end of all things is near. Therefore be alert and of sober mind, and so that you may pray. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. If anyone speaks, they should do so as one who speaks the very words of God. If anyone serves, they should do so with the strength God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. To him be the glory and the power forever and ever. Amen." And so Peter writes this section, and really what he's talking about is we need to learn how to live for what lasts. And to do so, Peter gives a few points, a few points that I see in this, that will require us to, number one, we need to break free from our past. The past is no longer our life. We are living for him now. And we need to break free from our past experiences or our past life. And think about this. Consider the early church. Last week I talked about being in unity because there were Jews and Gentiles, there were slaves and free, and they were supposed to be equals now. They were supposed to have that unity. But consider the early church. Before coming to Christ, their normal life, in verse 3, it looked like this. And Peter lists off debauchery, which is excessive indulgence in sensual pleasures. It also included lust, which is uncontrolled or illicit sexual desire or appetite for someone or something. There was drunkenness, simply the state of being intoxicated, having a little too much. And then there were orgies, which was a wild party characterized by excessive drinking and indiscriminate sexual activity. There was carousing, which is the activity of drinking alcohol and enjoying oneself with others in a noisy, lively way. And there was idolatry, which is basically the worship or excessive devotion to anything other than the one true God. That was their life before. It wasn't the occasional slip up that they were in drunkenness or carousing or adulterous behavior or anything like that. That was their social life. Before Christ, that is what they did on the weekends. Maybe not even on the weekends. That's just when they would get together, that was their life. However, through Christ, those new believers were transformed. But how did that transformation change their relationships? So they broke free from the past. And how did their past react? We're told in verse 4. They are surprised, those in your past, they're surprised that you do not join them in their reckless, wild living, and they heap abuse on you. So here's the early church. They're used to doing this wild party stuff. They come to Christ and they stop. And their friends, they're shocked. And so they begin criticizing and mocking and making life difficult for those that have made that transition to following Christ. Similar to today, some individuals, they make that profession of faith in Christ and their old life attacks them for making that decision. But Peter reminds them to stand firm. Verse 1, he says, therefore, since Christ suffered in his body, arm yourselves also with the same attitude. He's saying, okay, if you're suffering because of me, remember, Christ suffered for us. And we need to have that same attitude that Christ had. Really following Jesus isn't about adding religious activity, and I totally agree with that, to our existing life, to doing more things, the Bible studies and the prayer meetings and all those things. It's about dying to our old self. That's what following Jesus is all about. And dying to ourselves can be painful. It can be losing friendships in our past. And so following Jesus, it's going to require a battle against our old desires and the habits and even the people that we associate with. But Peter shares a powerful truth, continuing on in verse 1, where he says, because whoever suffers in the body is done with sin. Basically saying, each time we choose Christ over our own comfort, we're experiencing a little bit of death to our past. Saying no when everybody around you is saying yes, you're dying to yourself. Standing alone when the crowd decides to go a different direction, you're dying to yourself. And it's not fun, but it is freedom that leads us to what he says in verse 2. He says, as a result, they do not live the rest of their earthly lives, those that have made that transformation. They do not live the rest of their earthly lives for evil human desires, but rather for the will of God. As we break free from our past, we begin living for the will of God. And as we are living for the will of God, Peter writes that we are to, number 2, live urgently. Verse 7. He says, the end of all things is near. Therefore, be alert and of sober mind so that you may pray. Above all, love each other deeply because love covers over a multitude of sins. And so we look at this. The end of all things is near. Now, we've been hearing that for 2,000 years. And the end of all things being near is still true today. Each day we are a day closer. Whether that means the second coming of Christ, that he returns to take his bride home, or our last day on earth. We don't know when our day is going to come to an end. So for all of us, the end of all things is near. Whether it's the second coming or our life, our time on this earth is done. Either way, our time is limited. And because of this, Peter writes, therefore, be alert and of sober mind so that you can pray. When we realize time is short, we don't let distractions take us off course. We don't let the trivial things slow us down. And prayer becomes essential, not an optional thing in life. And a great example of that, it's not a great example, but an honest example of that is those who get a terminal diagnosis. Whether believer or not, they realize their time is limited. They realize it, and many for the very first time realize, oh, my time is short on this earth. And those that don't know God, don't know Jesus, a lot of times that means fear, frustrations. For those with God, those are the times where we can have that peace and comfort that only he can give. But we also gain or expand that focus of living urgently for what matters. And knowing our time is limited, some questions. How might it change how we schedule our days? Honestly, we don't know if today is our last day. So how might that change how we schedule our days? What would we prioritize? Maybe instead of going out and playing around the golf, you spend time with your family. Or instead of doing something that you just absolutely love to do, that you spend it with those that are important to you. Or what conversations would we finally have? Those where we need to bury the hatchet, or where we need to, just make amends, or we need to speak truth into somebody. Knowing that our time is limited, what would change? And that's that mindset Peter's encouraging us to adopt. Not out of fear that our time is limited, but out of clarity about what truly matters as we go through this life. And then Peter ends this verse 7, by telling us to love actively. He says, above all, love each other deeply. No, to love all people, but to love deeply, meaning not casually or conveniently, but loving in a way that might cost us something. Maybe forgiving someone when it's hard to forgive. Serving somebody that you really don't care for, serving when you are especially tired. Or loving someone when everybody else leaves. He says, love deeply, and we are to love this way because love covers over a multitude of sins. It's not that love excuses sin away and pretends it didn't happen. Rather, love chooses to forgive instead of keeping a score of what was done wrong. Love extends grace instead of holding grudges against others. And scriptural examples, and we bring this up a lot, is Jesus on the cross. He's being crucified by the Romans, because the Jews wanted him dead. And he's on that cross, and what does he say? He says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. The first martyr, Stephen, same thing. He's being stoned to death, and in the middle of his stoning, he looks up to heaven and says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And what an amazing way to love actively. To love people so much that, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And Peter then, he's talking about love each other deeply. Love covers a multitude of sins. And he then lists off some things we can do to show that love we have for others. He says, offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. You know, in the early church, there were a lot of traveling teachers, and they would need a place to stay. New believers needed a new community to be a part of. And so they would open their homes and offer hospitality without grumbling. And as I was going through this, the thought of Jesus himself, when anytime he needed encouragement or anytime he had a rough day, he would end up going back to Bethany, which is where the home of Lazarus, Mary, and Martha was. And that's where he would spend a lot of time. Being cared for, being in that community with those individuals. But there were times where he would bring the disciples with him. He'd say, hey, Martha, we're here. What's for dinner? And Martha showed hospitality. But the importance of showing that hospitality without grumbling. But that can be our ministry as well. Maybe opening our home, but really being available, being hospitable, caring for people that aren't like us. Being involved in what ministry can be without grumbling about every little thing. He says, offer hospitality without grumbling. He says, use whatever gift you have received to serve others. And this is from verse 10. In verse 10, he says, you're stewards of these gifts. We are managers of someone else's property. So these gifts that we have, if we have a speaking gift, that's God's. If we have a serving gift, it belongs to God. If we have musical talents, musical gifts, it's God's. Our time, our talents, our treasures, everything belongs to God. But he's entrusted it to us temporarily to use for his purposes. And so he says, use your gift, whatever gift you have, to receive to serve others. He's given us gifts. So let's use those. But as we use those gifts, or as we serve others with those gifts, Peter reminds us to do everything with God's strength and for God's glory. Now, verse 11, it kind of brings things together, because he talks about, if you speak as one who speaks the very words of God. That it's our voice, but it's not our message. It is God's. Or if you're serving somebody, that we need to depend on God. As if you're serving, serve with the strength that God provides. But the goal in everything is that in all things, God may be praised through Jesus Christ. It all comes back to Christ. Christ is the one that gets us to God, makes that connection with God. We can only come to the Father through Christ. And so we need to live for him, because that is what will last beyond our life. So what now? Some things we can maybe do. Maybe identify one area in our life where we're still trying to keep one foot in our old life. Maybe it's how we spend our evenings or our weekends. Do we still want to do the things that we've always done, even if they're right on the edge of, should I be doing this or not? Or maybe the way we talk to others, we still want to use the language we've always used, but maybe God wants us to talk differently, or the way we use the resources that He gives us, instead of spending money flippantly, that we are purposeful in what we use our money for, or even what we choose to watch or listen to, TV, radio, movies. What do we allow in that God is saying, you don't need that stuff? Just set it aside. And if we can identify something in our life that we're still trying to keep one foot in that old life, we ask God for the strength to choose His way and not our own. Knowing that if we choose to follow Him, if we choose to do those things, living a life that lasts, we might lose some friendships, some relationships over that. There might be a lot of people that don't understand, why do you do the things that you do? There may be times where you feel completely alone in the decisions that you make. And that's why we need God's strength to choose what He desires over our own selfish desires. But as we're going through this, we need to remember that we're not alone. We have each other. We have the Big C church. Yes, we have our church family, and even so, we have those that are even closer to us, like Jesus. There were the multitudes, but then He also had the 12, but He really focused on 3, but He was really close to 1. But He wasn't alone as He went through this life, just as we are not alone. We have one another. We're part of a community that can love and serve and live urgently for something that will last forever. We're part of something bigger than ourselves. So what will we do today with today? What will we do with today, knowing that the end of all things is near? Again, second coming or our final day on this earth. Our time is limited, and our gifts are on loan from God to use for His glory. How will we go about living our lives for what will last? I want to thank you for taking some time to join me today, and I hope this message blesses you, teaches you in some way, and I hope to see you again next time. God bless.